My name is Alex Thompson, and I'm 28 years old. Last Christmas, I sat at my parents' dining room table in Naperville, watching the snow fall outside their kitchen window, my heart pounding as I prepared to drop the biggest bombshell my family had ever heard. The smell of my mom's famous honey-glazed ham filled the air, Christmas music played softly in the background, and my relatives chatted about their holiday plans. Everything seemed perfect, until my older brother Ryan looked across the table with that familiar smirk I'd grown to despise. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The conversation had turned to New Year's resolutions and career goals when Ryan decided to make his annual speech about success and ambition. His voice carried that condescending tone he'd perfected over the years as he gestured toward me with his wine glass. The room gradually fell silent as family members sensed the tension building. My parents, Michael and Linda, exchanged worried glances. My younger sister Jessica shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Even Grandma Rose, who usually defended me, seemed to brace herself for what was coming. That's when Ryan delivered the words that would change everything. His declaration hung in the air like smoke from a fire, poisoning the festive atmosphere and making my cheeks burn with humiliation. But instead of shrinking away like I had countless times before, I did something that made everyone's jaw drop. I smiled, reached into my jacket pocket, and pulled out a business card that would flip their entire world upside down. What happened next left my brothers speechless and my family staring at me like they'd never seen me before. Growing up as the middle child in the Thompson household meant living in a constant state of comparison. My older brother Ryan had always been the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. Even as kids, he was the star athlete, the straight-A student, the charismatic leader who commanded attention wherever he went. Teachers loved him, coaches praised him, and our parents never missed an opportunity to brag about his latest achievement to anyone who would listen. Ryan went to Northwestern University on a partial academic scholarship, studied business and marketing, and landed what our family considered a dream job at a prestigious advertising agency in downtown Chicago. By the time he turned 30, he was driving a BMW, living in a trendy loft in River North, and dating models and influencers who looked like they'd stepped off magazine covers. Our dad Michael would beam with pride whenever Ryan's name came up in conversation, often saying things like "that boy's got the Midas touch" or "Ryan's going places, mark my words." Then there was my younger sister Jessica, who had inherited our mother's artistic talents and Ryan's natural charm. She studied graphic design at the Art Institute of Chicago and quickly made a name for herself creating brand identities for local restaurants and boutiques. Her Instagram was filled with glamorous photos from gallery openings and networking events, and she had that effortless cool that made everything she touched seem trendy and desirable. Mom Linda would constantly share Jessica's work on Facebook, adding captions like "so proud of my talented daughter" with rows of heart emojis. And then there was me, Alex, the quiet middle child who seemed to drift through life without making much of an impression on anyone. While Ryan was winning sales awards and Jessica was getting featured in local art magazines, I was the family member who just existed in the background. I'd graduated from the University of Illinois with a computer science degree, but instead of landing a flashy corporate job like everyone expected, I'd chosen a different path that my family didn't quite understand. For the past 3 years, I'd been working at a small coffee shop called Brew and Bites in Lincoln Park, serving lattes and cappuccinos to morning commuters and college students. It wasn't glamorous work, and the pay was barely enough to cover rent on my modest one-bedroom apartment a few blocks away. My family saw this as evidence that I lacked ambition, that I was content to waste my education on menial labor while my siblings climbed the ladder of success. What they didn't know was that Brew and Bites had become my cover story, my way of maintaining privacy while I built something extraordinary behind the scenes. The coffee shop job was real, but it was far from my only source of income. Every morning before my shift, and every evening after closing time, I worked on developing cybersecurity software from my apartment. I'd taught myself advanced programming languages, studied encryption methods, and spent countless hours understanding the vulnerabilities that plagued modern businesses. 3 years ago, while serving coffee to a frustrated businessman who just had his company's data breached, I realized there was a massive gap in the market for affordable, user-friendly cybersecurity solutions designed specifically for small and medium-sized businesses. Most existing programs were either too expensive or too complicated for average business owners to implement effectively. I saw an opportunity to create something different, something that could protect companies without requiring a team of IT specialists to manage. I started small, developing a basic firewall program in my spare time and testing it on local businesses that frequented the coffee shop. Word spread quickly about this young barista who could solve their security problems for a fraction of what big consulting firms charged. Soon I was working with dozens of clients, then hundreds, all while maintaining the facade of being just another college graduate who couldn't find his way in the corporate world. The irony wasn't lost on me that while Ryan worked for an advertising agency that helped businesses promote themselves, I was actually protecting those same businesses from cyber threats that could destroy them overnight. While Jessica designed beautiful logos and websites, I was building the invisible infrastructure that kept those digital assets safe from hackers and data thieves. But because my work happened behind the scenes, because it wasn't flashy or immediately visible, my family assumed I was the failure among their successful children. Family gatherings had become exercises in patience and self-control. Every holiday, every birthday, every casual Sunday dinner turned into an opportunity for Ryan to showcase his latest promotion, or for Jessica to display her newest artistic achievement. Meanwhile, I would sit quietly, listening to their stories and deflecting questions about my own life with vague answers about working in tech or doing some freelance programming. My parents meant well, but their disappointment was palpable. Dad would make comments like, "Alex, when are you going to get serious about your career?" While Mom would sigh and say things like, "I just wish you had more ambition like your brother." They weren't trying to be cruel, but their words stung nonetheless. They saw my coffee shop job and modest lifestyle as evidence that I was wasting my potential, that I was the one Thompson child who hadn't inherited the family drive for success. Ryan, however, was less subtle in his criticism. He seemed to take genuine pleasure in pointing out my shortcomings, especially when we had an audience of relatives or family friends. He'd make jokes about my career in hospitality, or suggest that I needed to grow up and get a real job. His wife-to-be, a marketing executive named Brittany, would giggle at his comments and make observations about how different siblings could be, even when raised in the same household. The worst part was that I couldn't defend myself without revealing the truth about my business, and I wasn't ready to do that yet.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I was still building, still growing, still working towards something bigger than what I'd already achieved. I knew that one day I'd be able to show them exactly what I'd been doing with my time, but that day felt distant and uncertain. So I endured their comments, their pity, their well-meaning advice about networking and career development, all while knowing that my bank account balance told a very different story than the one they believed. By the time Christmas 2024 rolled around, I'd reached a breaking point. My company, SecureNet Solutions, had grown beyond my wildest expectations. We were protecting over 2,000 businesses across the Midwest, had a team of 15 employees working remotely, and were generating revenue that put me in a tax bracket my family couldn't even imagine. But to them, I was still just Alex the barista, the disappointing middle child who couldn't seem to get his life together. The invitation to Christmas dinner came with the usual mix of excitement and dread. I loved seeing my family, especially Grandma Rose, who had always believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. But I also knew that the gathering would inevitably include the standard interrogation about my career prospects, and Ryan's subtle digs about my lack of professional achievement. This year, however, felt different. This year, I was armed with information that would change everything. A few weeks before Christmas, I'd learned something interesting about Ryan's advertising agency. They'd been struggling to land new clients, particularly in the tech sector, and were desperately seeking opportunities to expand their portfolio. Through my network of business contacts, I'd discovered that Ryan's boss, David Martinez, had been specifically tasked with courting cybersecurity companies as potential clients. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. David had actually reached out to SecureNet Solutions through our website, requesting a meeting to discuss a potential marketing partnership. He had no idea that the CEO he was hoping to impress was the younger brother of one of his employees. I'd scheduled the meeting for the day after Christmas, planning to reveal my identity then and see how the conversation unfolded. But as I sat in my apartment on Christmas Eve, wrapping presents for my family, a better idea began to form. What if I could arrange for David to discover the truth in front of my entire family? What if Ryan's boss could be the one to introduce me properly, to show my parents and siblings exactly who I'd become while they weren't paying attention? The plan was risky, and it required some careful coordination, but the potential payoff was too tempting to ignore. I spent Christmas Eve making phone calls and sending carefully worded text messages, setting the stage for what I hoped would be the most memorable Christmas dinner in Thompson family history. I arranged for David to stop by my parents' house during dinner, ostensibly to drop off some documents for Ryan to review over the holiday weekend. I'd positioned it as a brief visit, just a few minutes to handle some urgent business matters that couldn't wait until after New Year's. The morning of Christmas arrived crisp and clear, with fresh snow blanketing the suburbs and giving everything that postcard-perfect holiday appearance. I drove to my parents' house in my modest Honda Civic, the same car I'd been driving since college, knowing it would be one of the last times I'd need to maintain this particular facade. In my jacket pocket, I carried business cards for SecureNet Solutions, including one with my name and title prominently displayed. CEO and founder. The words still gave me a thrill every time I saw them in print. As I pulled into the familiar driveway, I could see Ryan's BMW already parked outside, its pristine black paint job gleaming in the winter sunlight. Jessica's vintage Volkswagen Beetle sat beside it, covered in bumper stickers from various art festivals and music venues. The sight of my siblings' cars, so perfectly representative of their personalities and achievements, made me smile. Soon, very soon, they'd understand that success came in many different forms, and that the quiet middle child they'd underestimated had been playing a much bigger game than any of them realized. The front door opened before I could knock, and Mom emerged with her usual holiday enthusiasm, wearing the festive sweater that Jessica had designed for her the previous year. Her face lit up with genuine joy as she pulled me into a warm hug, the kind that made all the family drama feel temporarily insignificant. Dad appeared behind her, his own holiday sweater slightly askew, a glass of eggnog already in his hand despite the early hour. "Alex, you made it!" Mom exclaimed, ushering me inside where the warmth and familiar smells of home immediately enveloped me. Jessica's in the kitchen helping with the side dishes, and Ryan's in the living room watching football with your father. Oh, and Grandma Rose is here early this year. She's been asking about you. The house looked exactly as it had for every Christmas of my childhood, with the same decorations carefully arranged in the same spots, the same stockings hanging from the mantel, the same sense of organized chaos that came with hosting a large family gathering. But this year, everything felt different, because I was different. This year, I wasn't just the disappointing middle child showing up empty-handed and defenseless against Ryan's criticism. This year, I had a secret weapon that would change how everyone in this house saw me forever. As I made my rounds, greeting family members and exchanging the usual pleasantries about work and life, I felt a calm confidence that I'd never experienced during previous family gatherings. When Ryan emerged from the living room with his characteristic swagger, wearing an expensive sweater that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, I met his condescending smile with genuine warmth. "Well, well, if it isn't my little brother the barista," Ryan said, his tone carrying just enough affection to mask the underlying dismissal. "Still slinging coffee and living the bohemian dream, I see." "Something like that," I replied, accepting his brief hug and resisting the urge to mention that my bohemian lifestyle had recently involved purchasing a downtown office space that was probably worth more than his loft. "How's the advertising world treating you?" "Can't complain," Ryan said, puffing up with obvious pride. "Just landed a huge account last month, and my boss is already talking about potential partnerships with some major tech companies. Big things coming in the new year, you know how it is." I nodded sympathetically, wondering how he'd react when he learned that one of those major tech companies his boss was courting belonged to the brother he'd spent years mocking. The anticipation was almost overwhelming, but I forced myself to remain patient. The revelation would be worth the wait. Dinner preparation continued with the usual family choreography, everyone playing their assigned roles in the holiday production. Mom orchestrated the kitchen activities with military precision, while Dad provided commentary on the football game and unsolicited advice about cooking techniques. Jessica artfully arranged appetizers on platters she'd designed herself, making everything look like it belonged in a lifestyle magazine. Ryan held court in the living room, regaling visiting relatives with stories about his professional accomplishments and future plans. And I helped where I could, set the table, opened wine bottles, and listened to the familiar rhythm of family conversations, all while counting down the hours until David Martinez would arrive and change everything. For the first time in years, I was actually looking forward to the traditional post-dinner discussion about career goals and personal achievements. This year, I had quite a story to tell. Grandma Rose was the first person I sought out after making my rounds through the house. I found her in Dad's study, sitting in his leather recliner with a cup of tea, quietly observing the controlled chaos of Christmas preparation through the doorway. At 82, she had the kind of wisdom that came from decades of watching family dynamics play out, and she'd always been my refuge during difficult times. "There's my favorite grandson," she said with a mischievous smile, knowing full well that Ryan would bristle if he heard her playing favorites. "Come sit with me for a minute before this circus really gets started." I settled into the chair beside her, grateful for a moment of peace away from the performance expectations that seemed to permeate every family gathering. Grandma Rose had raised 5 children during the Great Depression, built a successful catering business with my late grandfather, and maintained her independence well into her 80s. She understood hard work and patience in ways that my parents' generation sometimes struggled to appreciate. "You look different today," she observed, studying my face with those sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "There's something in your expression I haven't seen before. Confidence maybe, or anticipation." I couldn't help but smile at her perceptiveness. Grandma Rose had always been able to read people better than anyone else in our family, which was probably why she'd never joined in the chorus of concern about my career choices. While my parents fretted about my future, and Ryan made jokes about my lack of ambition, she'd simply watched and waited, trusting that I knew what I was doing even when I wasn't sure. "You could say that," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "I've been working on something for a while now, and I think today might be the day it all comes together." She leaned forward slightly, her interest clearly piqued. "Does this have anything to do with all those late nights you've been keeping? Linda mentioned that she calls your apartment sometimes, and you don't answer until very late." The fact that my mother had been monitoring my phone habits wasn't particularly surprising, but it reminded me how much my family worried about me despite their criticism. They genuinely believed I was struggling, that I was lost and directionless, and their concern came from a place of love even if it didn't always feel that way. Something like that, I said, reaching over to squeeze her weathered hand. I promise you'll understand everything very soon. Just trust me a little longer. Grandma Rose nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. I've been trusting you for 28 years, sweetheart. I'm not about to stop now, but I will say this. Whatever you're planning, make sure it comes from the right place. Revenge might feel satisfying in the moment, but love and forgiveness last longer. Her words hit me harder than I expected. Was this about revenge? Part of me wanted to deny it, to claim that my motivations were purely about truth and honesty, but I couldn't ignore the satisfaction I felt imagining Ryan's face when he realized who I really was. Maybe there was some revenge mixed in with my desire for recognition. Maybe that wasn't entirely wrong after years of enduring his condescension. I understand, I said finally. I'm not trying to hurt anyone. I just want them to see me clearly for once. Before Grandma Rose could respond, Jessica appeared in the doorway, flour dusting her dark hair and a smile brightening her face. Of all my siblings, Jessica had always been the easiest to get along with, perhaps because she was young enough to remember when I used to help her with homework and teach her basic computer skills. She might have inherited the family talent for creativity, but she'd never made me feel diminished by her success. Alex, perfect timing, she said, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. Mom's trying to figure out the new smart oven Dad bought her, and none of us can make sense of the programming. Ryan keeps insisting it's just like his fancy one, but he's been pushing buttons randomly for 10 minutes. I couldn't help but laugh at the image of my supposedly tech-savvy brother being defeated by kitchen appliances. Let me guess, he won't admit he needs help reading the manual. You know our brother, Jessica replied with an eye roll. He'd rather break the thing than acknowledge he doesn't understand something. Mom's getting frustrated, and Dad's making it worse by offering suggestions from the couch. It's like watching a sitcom, except we actually have to eat whatever comes out of that oven. Following Jessica back to the kitchen, I found Mom standing in front of the sleek new appliance with her hands on her hips, wearing the expression she'd perfected during our teenage years, when homework wasn't getting done or chores were being ignored. Ryan stood beside her, jabbing at the digital display with increasing irritation, while Dad called out instructions from the living room about buttons he couldn't even see. It's not that complicated, Ryan was saying, his voice carrying that edge it always developed when he felt his competence being questioned. These things are all basically the same. You just need to set the temperature and timer. Except the temperature settings are in some kind of code. Mom replied, clearly reaching the end of her patience. And every time you touch something, it starts beeping and flashing different colors. I just want to cook a ham, not launch a space shuttle. I approached the oven and quickly scanned the digital interface, recognizing the programming language immediately. It was actually a fairly sophisticated system, designed to optimize cooking times and temperatures based on the type and weight of food being prepared. The codes Mom was seeing were simply menu shortcuts, and the beeping indicated the system was waiting for additional input to complete the cooking program. Mind if I take a look? I asked, stepping forward. Ryan moved aside reluctantly, clearly annoyed that his technical expertise had failed him in front of the family. Be my guest, but I'm telling you, these interfaces are poorly designed. It's not user-friendly at all. Within 30 seconds, I had the oven programmed correctly, the ham loaded and cooking, and the display showing a clear countdown timer with temperature readings. The sudden silence from the machine was almost deafening after several minutes of constant beeping and electronic protests. How did you do that so quickly? Mom asked, staring at the now calm display with a mixture of relief and amazement. It's just a matter of understanding the logic behind the programming, I explained, trying to downplay my technical skills out of habit. Once you know what the system is looking for, it's pretty straightforward. Ryan's expression had shifted from annoyance to something that looked almost like suspicion. Since when are you some kind of tech expert? I thought you worked in a coffee shop. The question hung in the air for a moment, and I realized this was a preview of the larger conversation we'd be having later in the day. My family had become so accustomed to thinking of me as the non-technical sibling that any demonstration of actual expertise seemed to confuse them. I pick things up here and there, I said casually. You'd be surprised what you can learn when you have time to actually read the manuals. Dad's laughter carried in from the living room. That's my boy. Sometimes the simplest approach is the best approach. Ryan, you should let your brother handle the technical stuff more often. I caught the flash of irritation that crossed Ryan's face at Dad's comment. Being upstaged by his younger brother in front of the family clearly wasn't sitting well with him, especially when it came to technology, which was supposed to be part of his professional expertise in marketing and digital advertising. The next few hours passed in the familiar rhythm of Christmas preparation. I helped wherever I was needed, setting up additional seating in the dining room, opening bottles of wine, and generally trying to make myself useful without drawing too much attention. But I noticed that Ryan kept watching me with new interest, as if he was seeing me differently after the oven incident. Jessica and I worked together to arrange the appetizer spread, and she filled me in on her latest projects while we sliced cheese and arranged crackers on her handmade platters. She'd just finished designing a complete brand identity for a new restaurant in Wicker Park, and the owner was so pleased with her work that he'd referred her to 3 other business owners looking for similar services. The best part is that they're all willing to pay premium rates because they've seen what good design can do for their competitors, she explained, carefully arranging olives in a pattern that looked effortless, but probably took years of artistic training to perfect. It's funny how once you prove yourself in one area, opportunities just start multiplying. Her words resonated more than she probably realized. I'd been thinking about that exact phenomenon as my own business had grown over the past few years. Once SecureNet Solutions had established a reputation for reliable, effective cybersecurity, clients started referring their business contacts to us almost automatically. Success had a way of building on itself, creating momentum that was hard to stop once it really got rolling. That's the dream, right? I said, helping her transfer the platters to the dining room. Building something that people actually value, and getting recognized for the work you put into it. Jessica paused in her arranging to look at me more closely. You sound like you're speaking from experience. Is there something you're not telling us about your work situation? Before I could answer, Ryan appeared in the doorway, drawn by the mention of work and success like a moth to flame. What work situation? Last I heard, Alex was still serving coffee and doing the occasional odd job for beer money. The dismissive tone in his voice was so familiar that I almost didn't react to it, but something about Jessica's supportive presence and my growing confidence made me feel less willing to simply absorb his comments without pushback. Actually, I've been developing some software on the side, I said, keeping my voice level and matter of fact. It's been going pretty well lately. Ryan's eyebrows shot up with what looked like genuine surprise. Software? What kind of software? Like apps or websites, or what? Cybersecurity programs, I replied, watching his expression shift from surprise to skepticism. Small business protection systems mainly. There's a pretty big market for affordable security solutions. Cybersecurity, Ryan repeated slowly as if he was testing the words to see if they sounded plausible coming from me. That's a pretty competitive field, isn't it? Lots of big companies with huge budgets and teams of experts. His tone suggested that he found it hard to believe I could compete in such a sophisticated market, which wasn't entirely unreasonable given what he knew about my background and current living situation. From his perspective, cybersecurity was probably something that required advanced degrees, corporate backing, and resources that were far beyond the reach of someone working at a coffee shop. It can be competitive, I agreed. But there are also a lot of gaps in the market, especially for smaller businesses that can't afford enterprise-level solutions. Sometimes being smaller and more flexible is actually an advantage. Jessica looked intrigued by the conversation, her artistic mind probably drawn to the idea of creative problem-solving in a technical field. That sounds really interesting, Alex. How did you get started with that? Did you take classes or teach yourself? Mostly self-taught, I said, which was true as far as it went. I've always been interested in how systems work and how to protect them from threats. It started as a hobby and gradually turned into something more serious. Ryan's skeptical expression had deepened as he listened to our exchange. So you're telling me that while you've been working at a coffee shop for the past 3 years, you've also been running some kind of cybersecurity business on the side, and this business is actually successful enough to support you? The way he phrased the question made it clear that he found the entire premise hard to believe. In his mind, successful businesses required visible markers of success, things like office spaces, business cards, corporate clients, and professional networks. The idea that someone could build something significant while maintaining a low profile probably seemed contradictory to everything he understood about how the business world operated. I wouldn't say it's supporting me yet, I said, which was technically accurate since my coffee shop job still provided my official income for tax purposes. But it's been growing steadily, and I'm optimistic about where it's heading. Before Ryan could probe deeper, Mom's voice called from the kitchen asking for help with the final dinner preparations. The conversation ended there, but I could see the wheels turning in Ryan's head as he tried to reconcile this new information with his existing understanding of my life and capabilities. As we moved into the final phase of Christmas dinner preparation, I found myself paying closer attention to my family's dynamics than I had in years. Maybe it was because I knew everything was about to change, or maybe it was because I finally felt secure enough in my own achievements to observe theirs without feeling threatened or diminished. Dad had always been proud of his children's accomplishments, but his pride seemed to manifest differently depending on which child he was discussing. When he talked about Ryan's career, his voice carried the satisfaction of someone whose investment had paid off exactly as expected. Ryan had followed the traditional path of education, employment, and advancement that Dad understood and respected. With Jessica, Dad's pride was tinged with amazement, as if he couldn't quite believe that his youngest child had inherited talents that were so different from his own practical, business-oriented mindset. He bragged about her artistic achievements with the wonder of someone discovering a foreign language, proud but not entirely sure how to translate her success into terms he fully comprehended. But when Dad talked about me, which he did less frequently, his tone carried worry and confusion rather than pride. He wanted to be supportive, but he couldn't understand why someone with my education and apparent intelligence would choose to work in a coffee shop instead of pursuing a more conventional career path. His love for me was never in question, but his bewilderment was equally obvious. Mom's approach was more direct and more emotional. She worried about my financial security, my social life, my future prospects, and my general happiness in ways that probably kept her awake at night. Her comments about my career choices came from a place of maternal concern rather than disappointment, but they stung nonetheless, because they revealed how little she understood about what I was actually doing with my life. As I watched my family navigate their familiar roles and relationships, I realized that part of what made today's revelation so important was that it would allow them to stop worrying about me. They could finally see that their concern had been misplaced, that I'd been building something substantial while they thought I was drifting aimlessly through my 20s. The dining room table looked spectacular when we finally finished setting everything up. Mom's best china gleamed under the chandelier. Jessica's artistic touch was evident in every carefully arranged detail, and the smell of perfectly cooked food filled the air with promises of the feast to come. It was the kind of scene that appeared in holiday movies and family magazines, warm and welcoming and full of love, but underneath the surface perfection, I could feel the undercurrents of tension and expectation that always accompanied our family gatherings. Ryan was still processing our earlier conversation about my supposed software business, clearly torn between skepticism and curiosity. Jessica seemed genuinely interested in learning more about my work, but also confused about why I'd never mentioned it before. Mom and Dad were focused on the logistical details of serving dinner, but I knew they'd absorbed enough of our conversation to have questions of their own. As we took our seats around the table, with Grandma Rose in her traditional place of honor at Dad's right hand and everyone else arranged according to a seating chart that had evolved over decades of family meals, I checked my phone discreetly to confirm that David Martinez was still planning to arrive during dinner as we discussed. His text message was brief but reassuring, running a few minutes behind schedule, but should be there around 7:30 as planned. Looking forward to meeting the team and discussing the partnership opportunity. Perfect timing. Dinner service usually took about an hour, which meant David would arrive right around dessert time when everyone was relaxed and the conversation had settled into its post-meal rhythm. The anticipation was almost overwhelming, but I forced myself to focus on enjoying what might be the last family meal where I was seen as the underachieving Thompson sibling. Dad said grace with his usual blend of gratitude and formality, thanking God for family, health, prosperity, and the opportunity to gather together in celebration of Christ's birth. His words were sincere and heartfelt, and for a moment I felt a pang of guilt about the disruption I was planning to introduce into this peaceful scene. But as we began passing dishes and filling our plates, as Ryan launched into his annual recap of professional achievements and future goals, as Mom and Dad beamed with pride at their successful eldest son, I reminded myself that truth wasn't disruption, truth was illumination. And my family deserved to see me clearly, just as much as I deserved to be seen. The meal progressed with all the familiar beats of Thompson family Christmas dinners. Dad carved the ham with ceremonial precision while Mom fussed over side dishes and made sure everyone had everything they needed. Ryan dominated the conversation with stories about his latest advertising campaigns and the important clients his agency had landed over the past year. We just signed a contract with this tech startup that's developing some kind of revolutionary app, Ryan was saying, gesturing with his fork for emphasis. The CEO is supposed to be some kind of genius, built the whole company from nothing in just a few years. David, my boss, is handling the account personally because it could be huge for us. I nearly choked on my wine at the irony of Ryan unknowingly describing the exact type of success story that he refused to believe I could be part of. The universe's sense of humor was apparently even sharper than I'd realized. What kind of app? Jessica asked, always interested in hearing about creative businesses and innovative design solutions. Something about cybersecurity, Ryan replied, and I had to grip my napkin to keep from laughing out loud. I don't really understand the technical details, but apparently they've got some kind of revolutionary approach to protecting small businesses from hackers and data breaches. David says the CEO is brilliant but mysterious, keeps a really low profile, doesn't do interviews or publicity. The description was so perfectly accurate that for a moment I wondered if David had somehow figured out who I was and shared details about SecureNet solutions with Ryan without revealing the connection. But that seemed unlikely given the careful way we'd planned today's meeting. Cybersecurity seems like such a complicated field, Mom said, refilling water glasses with the efficiency of someone who'd been hosting family dinners for decades. I can barely figure out how to update the password on my email account. It's definitely complex, Ryan agreed, warming to his favorite topic of business success and professional expertise. That's why companies like ours are so valuable. We help translate technical innovations into marketing messages that regular people can understand and appreciate. Dad nodded approvingly, clearly enjoying Ryan's confident analysis of market dynamics and business strategy. That's exactly the kind of thinking that separates successful people from everyone else. You have to understand not just what you're selling, but how to communicate its value to potential customers. The conversation continued along these predictable lines, with Ryan explaining various aspects of modern marketing while the rest of the family listened with varying degrees of interest and comprehension. I found myself studying his animated expressions and confident gestures, wondering how his demeanor would change when he realized that the mysterious CEO he'd been describing was sitting right across the table from him. As we moved through the main course and began contemplating dessert, I checked my phone again and saw that David's arrival was now less than 30 minutes away. The final act of this long-running family drama was about to begin, and I felt a mixture of excitement, nervousness, and deep satisfaction at the thought of finally revealing who I really was to the people who'd known me longest but understood me least. Dessert arrived with Mom's traditional flourish, her famous apple pie accompanied by vanilla ice cream and freshly whipped cream that she'd insisted on making from scratch, despite Jessica's offers to help with a store-bought alternative. The warm cinnamon and nutmeg scents filled the dining room, mixing with the lingering aromas of our Christmas feast and creating that perfect holiday atmosphere that Hallmark cards tried to capture but never quite achieved. As we settled into the comfortable post-meal rhythm that characterized the best part of family gatherings, Ryan leaned back in his chair with the satisfied expression of someone who'd thoroughly enjoyed both the food and the opportunity to hold court for the past hour. His earlier skepticism about my supposed software development seemed to have faded, replaced by the mellow contentment that came with good food, good wine, and a captive audience for his professional success stories. "You know what the best part about this new client is," Ryan continued, apparently not finished with his analysis of the cybersecurity company that had captured his agency's attention. "The CEO built the whole thing without any traditional marketing or publicity. No press releases, no industry conferences, no social media presence. Just word-of-mouth recommendations and client referrals." Dad looked impressed by this information, his business-oriented mind clearly intrigued by the idea of success without conventional promotional strategies. "That takes real confidence in your product. Either that, or the person doesn't understand modern marketing techniques." "Oh, he understands them," Ryan said with certainty. "David says this guy is incredibly sophisticated about business strategy. He's just chosen to focus on product development and customer satisfaction instead of self-promotion. It's actually pretty smart when you think about it." The irony of hearing Ryan praise my business philosophy while simultaneously dismissing my professional capabilities was almost too much to bear. I took a large bite of pie to prevent myself from saying something that would spoil the surprise I'd been planning for months. Jessica, who had been listening to Ryan's analysis with the polite attention that family dinners required, suddenly turned to me with renewed interest. "Alex, you mentioned earlier that you've been working on cybersecurity software. Is that similar to what Ryan's talking about? Maybe you could get some insights from his experience with this client." The question hung in the air for a moment, and I could feel everyone's attention focusing on me in a way that felt both familiar and completely different from usual. Normally, when family conversations turned to my work situation, the attention carried undertones of concern, pity, or gentle encouragement. This time, there was genuine curiosity mixed with the kind of respect that came from Ryan's enthusiastic description of successful cybersecurity entrepreneurship. "There might be some similarities," I said carefully, trying to gauge how much I wanted to reveal before David's arrival made the conversation moot. "The market dynamics Ryan's describing sound pretty familiar." Ryan's expression shifted slightly, as if he was beginning to recognize something in my tone that he hadn't noticed before. "What exactly have you been working on? I mean specifically, are we talking about simple antivirus programs or something more sophisticated?" The direct question felt like a test, as if Ryan was trying to determine whether my claimed expertise was real or just another example of his younger brother's tendency to exaggerate minor accomplishments. His professional pride was clearly invested in being the family member who understood business and technology, and the possibility that I might have legitimate insights into his field seemed to make him uncomfortable. "Business protection systems, mainly," I replied, keeping my answer vague enough to avoid revealing too much while still demonstrating that I knew what I was talking about. "Integrated security solutions designed for companies that don't have dedicated IT departments but still need enterprise-level protection." The technical language seemed to catch Ryan off guard. His eyebrows rose slightly, and I could see him mentally comparing my description to what he'd learned about his agency's mysterious new client. The similarities were probably more obvious to him than they would have been to other family members, given his recent immersion in cybersecurity marketing research. "That's exactly what this new client does," he said slowly, his voice carrying a note of suspicion that made me wonder if he was starting to connect dots that he didn't quite want to acknowledge. "How much do you actually know about the cybersecurity industry? I mean, beyond whatever you've picked up from online tutorials or community college courses." The dismissive assumptions in his question stung, but they also reminded me why today's revelation was so important. Ryan literally couldn't imagine that his coffee shop working brother might have expertise that rivaled or exceeded his own, even when the evidence was right in front of him. "I know enough to recognize a good business opportunity when I see one," I said, allowing a hint of confidence to creep into my voice. "The market is full of expensive solutions that small businesses can't afford, and cheap solutions that don't actually work. There's a huge gap in the middle for someone who understands both the technical requirements and the budget constraints." Dad leaned forward with interest, his entrepreneurial instincts clearly engaged by talk of market gaps and business opportunities. "That sounds like solid thinking, Alex. Have you considered turning this into something more than a hobby? Maybe developing a real business plan?" The question revealed how completely my family misunderstood the scope of what I'd been doing for the past 3 years. In Dad's mind, I was still at the brainstorming stage, playing with ideas that might someday develop into an actual business venture. The possibility that I'd already built something substantial wasn't even on his radar. "I've given it some thought," I said, fighting to keep a straight face. "The challenge is always scaling from individual projects to something more systematic." Mom, who had been listening to our conversation while serving dessert, paused with the pie server in her hand. "Alex, honey, this all sounds very interesting, but are you sure you want to give up a steady job for something so uncertain? I know the coffee shop isn't glamorous, but at least it's reliable income." Her concern was genuine and motherly, rooted in the practical wisdom of someone who'd watched too many people chase dreams that never materialized. But it also demonstrated how little she understood about what I'd actually accomplished. In her mind, I was contemplating abandoning financial security for an untested business idea, rather than revealing a success story that had been unfolding under her nose for years. "Security is important," I agreed, choosing my words carefully. "But sometimes you have to take calculated risks if you want to build something meaningful." Ryan snorted with what sounded like amusement mixed with skepticism. "Calculated risks, that's rich coming from someone whose biggest professional decision in the past 3 years was choosing between the morning shift and the afternoon shift at a coffee shop." The comment hit exactly the way Ryan intended it to, sharp and dismissive, and designed to put me back in my place as the family member whose opinions about business strategy shouldn't be taken seriously. Under normal circumstances, I might have absorbed the criticism and changed the subject. But tonight felt different. Tonight I had backup coming. "You might be surprised by what people can accomplish when they're not busy talking about it," I said, my voice carrying an edge that made everyone at the table look at me with renewed attention. The shift in my tone seemed to catch Ryan off guard. His usual confident smirk faltered slightly, replaced by an expression that suggested he was beginning to sense that this conversation was heading somewhere unexpected. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, his voice carrying a defensive note that hadn't been there before. Before I could answer, the doorbell rang, its familiar chime echoing through the house and freezing everyone at the table in momentary surprise. We weren't expecting any other family members, and Christmas evening visitors were unusual in our neighborhood. Who could that be? Mom wondered aloud, glancing toward the front hallway with a mixture of curiosity and mild annoyance at having our family time interrupted. Ryan's expression suddenly shifted to recognition mixed with confusion. "Oh, that's probably David. He mentioned he might stop by tonight to drop off some documents for me to review over the weekend. I totally forgot he was coming." Dad looked puzzled by this information. Your boss is working on Christmas. That seems a bit extreme, even for the advertising business. He's not really working, Ryan explained, already pushing back from the table and standing up. It's just some client materials that need to be reviewed before a big meeting next week. David's really hands-on with important accounts. As Ryan headed toward the front door, I felt my heart rate accelerate with anticipation. The moment I'd been planning for months was finally arriving, and I had to resist the urge to grin as I imagined the conversation that was about to unfold. How interesting that he'd come all the way out to Naperville on Christmas. Grandma Rose observed, her sharp eyes focusing on me with an expression that suggested she sensed something significant was about to happen. The sound of voices carried from the front hallway, Ryan's familiar tone, mixing with a deeper voice that I recognized as David Martinez from our phone conversations. I could hear Ryan explaining about family dinner and apologizing for the inconvenience, while David assured him that the visit would only take a few minutes. Should we invite him in for coffee? Mom asked, automatically shifting into hostess mode. Despite the unexpected nature of the visit, it seems rude to make him stand in the entryway on Christmas. I'm sure he won't want to intrude on family time, Dad said, though his curiosity about meeting Ryan's boss was clearly evident in his voice. The voices from the hallway grew louder as they approached the dining room, and I could hear Ryan saying something about introducing David to the family. My pulse quickened as I realized the moment of truth was literally seconds away. Everyone, I'd like you to meet my boss, David Martinez, Ryan announced as he entered the dining room with a distinguished-looking man in his mid-40s wearing a tailored coat and carrying a leather briefcase. David stepped forward with the polished confidence of someone accustomed to making good first impressions, his eyes scanning the table as Ryan began the introductions. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, thank you for welcoming me into your home on Christmas. I apologize for the intrusion, but I have some time-sensitive materials that Ryan needs to review. Not a problem at all, Dad said, standing to shake David's hand. Any friend of Ryan's is welcome here. I'm Michael Thompson, and this is my wife Linda. Mom smiled warmly, clearly charmed by David's professional demeanor and obvious respect for Ryan. Would you like some coffee or a piece of pie? We were just finishing Christmas dinner. That's very kind, but I don't want to impose, David replied, though his eyes had moved past the formal introductions and were now focused on me with an expression of growing recognition. Ryan continued with the family introductions, his voice carrying the pride of someone showing off his successful connections. This is my sister Jessica, she's a graphic designer, and my grandmother Rose. And this is my younger brother Alex. The moment David's eyes met mine, his professional composure shifted to surprise, and then to barely contained excitement. Alex Thompson, he said slowly, as if testing the name to make sure he had it right. Alex Thompson of SecureNet Solutions. The dining room fell into complete silence. Ryan's confident expression froze mid-smile, his brain clearly struggling to process what David had just said. Mom and Dad looked confused, glancing between David and me, as if trying to understand why Ryan's boss seemed to know their unemployed son. Jessica's eyes widened with curiosity, while Grandma Rose leaned back in her chair, with an expression that suggested she'd been expecting something exactly like this. SecureNet Solutions, Ryan repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. What's SecureNet Solutions? David turned to Ryan, with an expression of genuine surprise. You don't know? Alex is the CEO of the company I've been trying to schedule a meeting with for the past 2 months. SecureNet Solutions is the cybersecurity firm I told you about, the one with the mysterious founder who's revolutionizing small business protection. The color drained from Ryan's face as the implications of David's words sank in. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound emerged. The confident, successful older brother who'd been holding court all evening suddenly looked like he'd been hit by a truck. I don't understand, Mom said, her voice trembling slightly. Alex works at a coffee shop. He serves lattes and cappuccinos. He's been doing that for 3 years. David looked even more confused, glancing between me and my family as if trying to reconcile 2 completely different versions of reality. Mrs. Thompson, your son is the CEO and founder of one of the most innovative cybersecurity companies in the Midwest. SecureNet Solutions protects over 2,000 businesses and generates millions in annual revenue. The words hit the dining room like a bomb. Dad's fork clattered to his plate, Jessica gasped audibly, and Mom looked like she might faint. But it was Ryan's reaction that held my attention. The brother who'd spent years mocking my lack of ambition, who dismissed my career choices and questioned my intelligence, was staring at me with an expression of complete shock and dawning humiliation. "That's impossible," Ryan said finally, his voice cracking slightly. "Alex doesn't know anything about business. He's never even had a real job. He lives in a tiny apartment and drives a beat-up Honda. There's no way he could be running a $1 million company." David reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder containing several documents, including what I recognized as SecureNet Solutions marketing materials and financial projections. "Mr. Thompson, I've been researching your son's company for months. Alex has built something truly remarkable. His innovative approach to affordable cybersecurity has disrupted the entire industry." He spread several papers on the table, including a client list that made Dad's eyes widen with recognition. Many of the businesses were local companies that he knew personally, respected establishments that would never trust their security to anything less than a top-tier professional service. "Johnson's Hardware has been our client for 2 years," I said quietly, referring to the store where Dad had been shopping for tools since before I was born. "So has Martinez Auto Repair and Thompson's Family Restaurant." Was evidence of failure when it was actually evidence of discipline and long-term thinking. Mom was still staring at the client list with an expression of disbelief. "Alex, honey, some of these companies have been our neighbors for decades. Mrs. Peterson from the flower shop, the Hendersons who own the bakery. They've all been working with you?" "Mrs. Peterson was actually one of my first clients," I explained. "She'd been having problems with her point-of-sale system getting hacked, and her previous IT consultant wasn't able to solve the problem. I designed a custom security protocol that not only fixed the immediate issue but prevented future attacks." The specific details seemed to make the reality of my success more concrete for my family. These weren't abstract business concepts or impressive-sounding numbers. These were real relationships with real people they knew and respected, proof that my work had tangible value in their own community. David was watching the family dynamics unfold with obvious fascination, clearly realizing that he'd stumbled into a much more complex situation than he'd anticipated. "Alex, I have to ask, did you know that Ryan worked for my agency when you agreed to this meeting?" The question focused everyone's attention back on me, and I realized that this was the moment where I had to decide how much of my planning to reveal. Did I admit that I'd orchestrated this entire confrontation, or did I let them believe it was an incredible coincidence? "I knew," I said simply. "I've known for months that Martinez Marketing was trying to court SecureNet Solutions as a client. When I realized the connection, I thought it might be interesting to see how things played out." Ryan's face flushed red with what looked like embarrassment mixed with anger. "So this was all planned? You set this up to humiliate me in front of our family?" The accusation stung because it wasn't entirely wrong. I had planned this confrontation, and part of me had definitely wanted to see Ryan's reaction when he realized how badly he'd underestimated me. But I'd also genuinely wanted my family to know the truth about my life and my achievements. "I set this up so that you could finally see who I really am," I replied. "I'm tired of being invisible. Tired of having my work dismissed, tired of being treated like the family failure when I've actually been more successful than any of you realized." The words carried more emotion than I'd intended, revealing years of frustration and hurt that I'd kept buried beneath a facade of patient acceptance. The room fell silent again as my family absorbed the weight of what I'd said and what it meant about how they'd been treating me. Grandma Rose was the first to break the silence, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd lived through enough family drama to recognize truth when she heard it. Well, she said, looking around the table with sharp eyes, I think we owe Alex an apology. And some congratulations. Grandma Rose's words seemed to unlock something in the room, breaking through the stunned silence that had settled over everyone like a heavy blanket. Dad was the first to respond, pushing back his chair and standing with the kind of deliberate movement that suggested he was still processing the magnitude of what he'd just learned. Alex, he said, his voice thick with emotion, I don't even know where to begin. All these years we thought. He trailed off, shaking his head as if trying to clear away years of misunderstanding. Son, I owe you the biggest apology of my life. Mom had tears streaming down her cheeks, her hands pressed to her mouth as she stared at the business documents still spread across our Christmas table. Oh, honey, what have we done? All those times I worried about your future, all those comments about getting a real job. You must have thought we were such fools. The raw emotion in her voice hit me harder than I'd expected. I'd been so focused on the satisfaction of proving Ryan wrong that I hadn't fully considered how painful this revelation would be for my parents, who'd spent years genuinely worrying about a son they thought was struggling. You weren't fools, I said, standing and moving around the table to hug Mom. You were being parents. You saw me working at a coffee shop and living in a small apartment, and you were concerned. That's what good parents do. Jessica had been unusually quiet during the initial shock, but now she was studying the SecureNet Solutions materials with the focused attention she usually reserved for design projects. Alex, this is incredible. The branding, the client testimonials, the market positioning. This is professional-level business development. How did you learn to do all this? Trial and error, mostly, I admitted. I made a lot of mistakes in the early days, but I had good mentors in the business community, and I wasn't afraid to ask questions or admit when I didn't know something. David had been watching our family reunion with obvious fascination, clearly realizing that he'd witnessed something more significant than a simple business introduction. If I may, he interjected gently. Alex's success story is exactly the kind of inspiration that my agency loves to help companies share. The young entrepreneur who builds something remarkable through pure determination and innovation, without fanfare or self-promotion. It's a marketer's dream. Ryan, who had been sitting in stunned silence since David's initial revelation, finally found his voice. But instead of the apology or congratulations that the moment seemed to call for, his words carried a bitter edge that surprised everyone at the table. This is unbelievable, he said, his voice rising with anger that had been building behind his shock. Do you have any idea how this makes me look? I've been working my ass off for years, climbing the corporate ladder, building a reputation, and my little brother has been secretly running a multi-million-dollar company while pretending to be a coffee shop worker. The selfishness of his response created an uncomfortable tension that made everyone shift in their seats. Even David looked taken aback by Ryan's focus on his own embarrassment rather than his brother's achievement. Ryan, Dad said sharply, this isn't about you. This is about Alex accomplishing something extraordinary. But Ryan was too deep in his wounded pride to hear reason. Isn't it though? Do you know how many times I've bragged to colleagues about being the successful Thompson brother? How many times I've made jokes about Alex's lack of ambition? David probably thinks I'm an idiot for not knowing what my own brother was doing. Actually, David said carefully, I think it speaks well of Alex's character that he kept his success private. Not everyone feels the need to broadcast their achievements. The comment was clearly intended as a diplomatic response, but Ryan took it as another blow to his ego. His face flushed deeper red, and I could see the anger building to a breaking point. Character, Ryan laughed bitterly. Is that what we're calling it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like deliberate deception. Alex let us all believe he was struggling while he was actually more successful than any of us. That's not character, that's manipulation. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud, poisoning the moment of family reconciliation that had been building. I felt my own anger rising in response to Ryan's inability to be happy for my success, his desperate need to make my achievement about his own wounded pride. Manipulation, I said, my voice carrying an edge that made everyone look at me with surprise. Is that really what you think this is about? What else am I supposed to think? Ryan shot back. You've been lying to us for 3 years, letting us worry about you, letting us give you advice about your career, all while secretly laughing at how clueless we were. The unfairness of his accusation hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't laughing at anyone, Ryan. I was protecting myself from exactly this kind of reaction. What's that supposed to mean? I took a deep breath, realizing that this was the moment where I finally had to say everything I'd been holding back for years. It means that every time I tried to share any hint of what I was working on, you shut me down. Every time I mentioned software development or business opportunities, you dismissed it as unrealistic dreaming. You made it clear that you didn't think I was capable of anything significant. That's not fair, Ryan protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? I pulled out my phone and opened the voice memo app. Do you want me to replay some of our conversations from family gatherings? Because I started recording them after a while, just to make sure I wasn't imagining how dismissive you were. The threat of having his own words played back to him seemed to deflate some of Ryan's anger, but it also seemed to make him more desperate to justify his behavior. Even if that's true, he said, you could have proven me wrong at any time. You chose to keep this secret, and now you're making me look like a fool in front of my boss. I'm not making you look like anything, I replied. Your reaction to learning about my success is making you look exactly like the person you've always been. The comment was harsher than I'd intended, but Ryan's inability to feel anything but resentment about my achievements had pushed me past the point of diplomatic restraint. I'd spent years absorbing his condescension and criticism, and I wasn't about to apologize for finally having the means to push back. And what's that supposed to mean? Ryan demanded. It means you can't stand the idea that someone else might be more successful than you, especially if that someone is your younger brother who you've spent years looking down on. The accusation seemed to hit home, because Ryan's face went from red to white in the span of a few seconds. That's not true, isn't it? Because right now, instead of congratulating me, or asking about how I built the business, or expressing any kind of pride in what I've accomplished, you're focused entirely on how my success affects your image. Mom had been listening to our argument with increasing distress, and now she stepped in with the authority of someone who'd refereed enough sibling fights to know when things were getting out of hand. Stop, she said firmly, both of you, just stop. This is Christmas dinner, and we're supposed to be celebrating as a family. Ryan, your brother has accomplished something amazing, and the appropriate response is congratulations, not resentment. Alex, I understand you're frustrated, but this isn't the time for settling old scores. Her intervention might have diffused the situation if Ryan had been willing to let it go. But something about the entire evening had triggered a level of wounded pride that seemed to demand more dramatic expression. You want to know what's really bothering me? Ryan said, his voice rising again. It's not just that Alex has been lying to us, it's that he's been sitting there all smug and superior, letting us give him money and worry about his future, when he probably makes more in a month than I make in a year. The mention of money seemed to surprise everyone at the table, including me. I hadn't realized that my parents had been supplementing my income, though it made sense given their concern about my financial situation. What money? I asked. Mom and Dad exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly not having intended for this information to become part of the evening's revelations. Alex, honey, Mom said reluctantly, we've been transferring $500 into your checking account every month for the past 2 years. We were worried about you making ends meet on a coffee shop salary, especially with rent prices in Chicago. The information hit me like a punch to the stomach. While I'd been building a multi-million-dollar business, my parents had been secretly supporting what they thought was their struggling son. The irony was almost too painful to process. I had no idea, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I never checked those deposits. My business account and personal account are completely separate, and I just assumed the extra money was from tips or pay adjustments. See, Ryan said triumphantly, as if my ignorance of the financial support somehow proved his point. You've been taking money from mom and dad while sitting on a fortune. That's not just deception, that's theft. The accusation was so unfair and so deliberately inflammatory that it seemed to shock everyone at the table into silence. Even David, who had been trying to remain diplomatically neutral, looked appalled by Ryan's characterization of the situation. Ryan Michael Thompson, Grandma Rose said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned the right to use full names when addressing misbehaving grandchildren. That is quite enough. Your brother had no knowledge of that money, and even if he had, it wouldn't change the fact that he's built something remarkable. But Ryan seemed to be beyond the reach of reason or family loyalty. The combination of wounded pride, professional embarrassment, and genuine shock had created a toxic mixture that was driving him toward increasingly extreme statements. Remarkable, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. You want to know what's remarkable? It's that my broke and worthless brother has apparently been playing some kind of long-term con game on our entire family. The words broke and worthless seemed to echo in the sudden silence that followed, carrying a weight and cruelty that went beyond anything Ryan had said before. I felt the impact of the phrase like a physical blow, not because I believed it was true, but because it revealed the depth of contempt that Ryan apparently felt for me despite everything he'd just learned. Mom gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth, as if she could somehow take the words back on Ryan's behalf. Dad's face hardened with an anger I rarely saw from him, while Jessica looked like she was witnessing a car accident in slow motion. David seemed to realize that he was watching a family implode in real time, and he began gathering his papers with the obvious intention of making a hasty exit. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through the toxic atmosphere with a calm that surprised even me, I think David should stay. Because this conversation isn't over. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the business card I'd been carrying all evening, placing it on the table in front of Ryan with deliberate precision. You called me broke and worthless, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion churning beneath the surface. So let me give you some facts that might help you understand exactly how broke and worthless I am. I pulled out my phone and opened the SecureNet Solutions financial dashboard, turning the screen so everyone at the table could see the numbers displayed there. Last month, SecureNet Solutions generated $2 million in revenue. Our profit margin is 38%, which means I personally earned more in November than you'll make in the next 2 years combined. Ryan's face went ashen as the numbers sank in, but I wasn't finished. The business is valued at approximately $15 million based on current revenue projections and growth trends. I own 85% of the company, which means my net worth is somewhere in the neighborhood of $12.7 million. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom looked like she might faint. Dad was staring at my phone screen as if it might be displaying information in a foreign language, and Jessica had her hands pressed to her mouth in amazement. But here's the really interesting part, I continued, addressing Ryan directly. David's agency has been trying to land SecureNet Solutions as a client because they recognize that we're exactly the kind of innovative company that could elevate their entire portfolio. The account would probably be worth more to Martinez Marketing than any client they've landed in the past 5 years. David nodded reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable with being drawn back into the family drama but unable to deny the accuracy of my statement. So when you call me broke and worthless, I said, meeting Ryan's eyes with unwavering directness, you're actually calling your boss's dream client broke and worthless. Which probably says more about your professional judgment than it does about my worth. The devastating logic of my response seemed to drain all the fight out of Ryan. He slumped back in his chair, his face cycling through expressions of shock, humiliation, and something that might have been the beginning of genuine regret. "Alex," he said, his voice barely audible, "I didn't know." "No," I agreed, "you didn't know, but that's because you never bothered to find out. You made assumptions based on what you could see, and you treated me accordingly. The fact that your assumptions were wrong doesn't change how you behaved when you thought they were right." The truth of that statement seemed to hit everyone at the table simultaneously. My success didn't erase years of dismissive treatment or make the hurtful comments any less real. If anything, it highlighted how wrong my family had been to judge my worth based on superficial markers of success. "I think," Dad said slowly, "that we all owe Alex more than just an apology. We owe him some serious reflection on how we've been treating him." "Michael's right," Mom said, wiping tears from her cheeks. "Alex, honey, I don't know how we make this right. All those years of worrying about you, giving you advice about your career, treating you like you needed our help and guidance. You must have wanted to scream at us." "Sometimes I did," I admitted, "but I also understood why you were concerned. From your perspective, I was a college graduate, working at a coffee shop with no apparent ambition or direction. Your worry came from love, even if it felt like criticism." David cleared his throat gently, clearly feeling that he should address the business implications of the evening's revelations. "Alex, I hope you'll understand that this situation puts me in a somewhat awkward position professionally. The meeting we had scheduled for next week can proceed exactly as planned," I finished. "My personal relationships don't affect my business decisions. If Martina's marketing can provide value to SecureNet Solutions, then we should explore that partnership. If not, then we'll go our separate ways." The professional grace of my response seemed to impress David, and it also served to remind everyone at the table that despite the family drama, I was still the CEO of a successful company with responsibilities that extended far beyond our Christmas dinner. "Ryan," I said, turning back to my brother, "I want you to understand something. I didn't reveal my success tonight to humiliate you or make you look bad. I did it because I'm tired of being invisible in my own family. I'm tired of being dismissed and underestimated and treated like the disappointing child who never lived up to his potential." Ryan nodded slowly, his earlier anger replaced by what looked like genuine shame. "I know, and I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say, except that I was wrong about everything. You can start by recognizing that success comes in many different forms," I replied. "You built your career through networking and self-promotion and climbing corporate ladders, and that works for you. I built mine through innovation and customer service and reinvesting profits instead of buying status symbols. Both approaches are valid." Jessica, who had been processing the evening's revelations in her characteristically thoughtful way, suddenly spoke up with a question that cut to the heart of the matter. "Alex, are you happy? I mean really happy? Because you've been living this double life for years, hiding your success, listening to us worry about you, and criticize your choices. That must have been incredibly lonely." The question caught me off guard, because it forced me to confront emotions I'd been avoiding. Had I been happy, or had I been so focused on building my business and proving my worth that I'd forgotten to actually enjoy my success? "I'm happier now," I said honestly, "now that the truth is out, now that you all know who I really am." The secrecy was necessary for a while, but it was also exhausting. "I'm ready to stop hiding." "What does that mean, practically speaking?" Dad asked, his business mind already moving toward logistics and planning. "It means I can finally move out of that tiny apartment and buy a house. It means I can hire more employees and expand SecureNet Solutions without worrying about maintaining my cover story. It means I can start living like the successful businessman I actually am, instead of the struggling coffee shop worker I've been pretending to be." Mom reached across the table to take my hand, her eyes still bright with tears. "Honey, I'm so proud of you, not just for building this amazing business, but for being patient with us while we figured out who you really were. I'm proud too, Dad added, his voice thick with emotion, and I'm sorry it took us so long to see it. The apologies and expressions of pride felt good, but they also highlighted how much time and energy had been wasted on misunderstandings that could have been avoided if I'd been more willing to reveal my success earlier, or if my family had been more willing to believe in my capabilities. As we sat around the table, the Christmas dinner, that had started as a traditional family gathering, had transformed into something much more significant. The truth about my business success was just the beginning of what felt like a fundamental shift in our family dynamics. Ryan was still processing his own role in the evening's drama, and I could see him struggling with the realization that his treatment of me had been based on completely false assumptions. Alex, he said finally, I need you to know that I'm genuinely happy for your success. Even if my initial reaction was terrible, I've been a bad brother, and I want to figure out how to do better. The admission felt genuine, and it represented the kind of self-reflection that I'd been hoping for, but not necessarily expecting. We all make mistakes, Ryan. The important thing is learning from them. David, who had been waiting patiently for the family reconciliation to reach a natural pause, stood up and gathered his papers with the efficiency of someone ready to make a graceful exit. Alex, I think we should definitely proceed with our scheduled meeting next week, he said, extending his hand for a professional handshake. Tonight has certainly been educational. Ryan, I'll see you at the office on Tuesday. We should probably discuss how to handle the client relationship, given your family connection. After David left, our family spent the rest of the evening talking in a way we hadn't in years. The revelation of my success had broken down barriers and forced conversations that were long overdue. We talked about dreams and ambitions, about the different ways people define and achieve success, about the importance of supporting each other, even when we don't fully understand the choices being made. By the time I drove home that night, everything had changed. I was no longer the disappointing Thompson son who couldn't get his life together. I was Alex Thompson, CEO and founder of SecureNet Solutions, successful entrepreneur, and finally, a family member who was seen and valued for who he really was. The next morning, I called my landlord and gave notice on my apartment. It was time to start living the life I'd earned, instead of hiding behind the persona I'd created. The coffee shop would have to find a new employee because I was ready to step fully into my role as a business leader. 3 months later, Ryan and I had dinner at my new house in Lincoln Park, a beautiful brownstone with a home office where I could work without pretending to be someone I wasn't. Our relationship was different now, built on mutual respect, rather than his assumed superiority. He'd learned to ask about my business with genuine interest, and I'd learned to share my successes without feeling like I needed to apologize for them. The Christmas dinner revelation had been painful for everyone involved, but it had also been necessary. Sometimes the truth hurts before it heals, but healing is impossible without truth. My family finally knew who I was, and I finally felt free to be myself. Looking back, I realized that Grandma Rose had been right about the importance of love and forgiveness, lasting longer than revenge. The satisfaction of proving Ryan wrong had been temporary, but the deeper satisfaction of being truly known and accepted by my family was permanent. Success, I learned, isn't just about building a profitable business or accumulating wealth. It's about being valued for who you really are, by people who matter to you, and sometimes, getting to that point requires the courage to stop hiding and start sharing the truth about your life, even when that truth might change everything. The weeks following that Christmas dinner felt like living in an alternate reality, where everything familiar had been rearranged into new and sometimes uncomfortable patterns. The morning after our explosive family revelation, I woke up in my small Lincoln apartment with dozens of missed calls and text messages from relatives who'd heard about the evening's events through the family grapevine. Apparently, Mom had called her sister within an hour of my departure, and the news had spread through our extended family network with the speed and efficiency of a well-designed computer virus. My Aunt Margaret, who'd always treated me with a mixture of pity and concern at family gatherings, sent a text message that perfectly captured the general sentiment spreading through our family tree. Alex, I can't believe we've all been so blind. Your mother told me everything about your company, and I feel terrible for all those times I suggested you consider going back to school or finding a more stable career path. Can we have lunch soon, so I can hear about your work properly? Similar messages arrived throughout the morning from cousins, uncles, family friends, and even my mom's book club members, who apparently felt invested in the Thompson family dynamics, despite having never actually met me. The sudden flood of attention and interest was overwhelming in a way I hadn't anticipated when I'd planned my Christmas revelation. But the most significant message arrived around noon, a carefully worded email from Ryan that must have taken him hours to compose, based on the timestamp, showing he'd started drafting it at 4 in the morning. Alex, I couldn't sleep last night. I kept replaying everything I said to you over the years, all the dismissive comments and condescending jokes, and I feel sick about it. You deserved better from me, from all of us, but especially from your older brother, who should have been supporting you instead of tearing you down. I don't expect you to forgive me immediately, but I want you to know that I'm committed to doing better. I've been thinking a lot about why I reacted the way I did, and I realized that your success threatened my identity as the accomplished Thompson sibling. That's my issue to work through, not yours to manage. I hope we can rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect, instead of the toxic dynamic I created. Your brother Ryan. Reading his words, I felt the anger and resentment I'd been carrying for years begin to shift into something more complex. Ryan's apology didn't erase the hurt he'd caused, but it demonstrated a level of self-awareness that I hadn't been sure he possessed. The fact that he'd acknowledged his jealousy and insecurity, instead of making excuses, suggested that maybe, eventually, we could develop the kind of brotherhood we should have had all along. I responded simply, "Thanks for the message. Let's talk soon when we've both had time to process everything." Alex. My phone rang almost immediately with a call from Taylor Brooks, the person I'd been dating for 6 months and the one relationship in my life that had been built entirely on truth from the beginning. Taylor was a high school English teacher who'd never cared about my financial status or professional achievements, which was part of why our relationship felt so genuine compared to the performance I'd been staging for my family. "So I'm guessing Christmas dinner was interesting," Taylor said, their voice carrying that mix of concern and amusement that characterized their approach to most situations. "Your text last night was pretty cryptic. Everything okay?" I spent the next hour recounting the entire evening in detail, from David Martinez's arrival to Ryan's angry accusations to the final revelation of my net worth that had left my family speechless. Taylor listened without interrupting, offering occasional sounds of sympathy or surprise as the story unfolded. "How do you feel about all of it?" Taylor asked when I'd finished. "I mean, you got what you wanted. Your family finally knows the truth about your success, but you don't sound as happy as I expected." The observation hit home because Taylor was right. I'd imagined this moment for years, fantasized about seeing my family's reaction when they learned who I really was, but the actual experience had been more painful and complicated than satisfying. "I think I underestimated how much it would hurt them," I admitted. "My parents have been sending me money for 2 years because they thought I was struggling. That kind of care and concern deserves better than the deception I put them through." "You weren't deceiving them to be cruel," Taylor pointed out. "You were protecting yourself from exactly the kind of dismissive treatment Ryan demonstrated. That's survival, not manipulation." "Maybe. But there's a difference between not volunteering information and actively maintaining a false identity. I could have told them the truth years ago, and they could have believed in you without needing proof," Taylor countered. "This isn't all on you, Alex. Your family created an environment where you didn't feel safe sharing your achievements. That's their responsibility too." The conversation helped me process the conflicting emotions I'd been experiencing since leaving my parents' house. Taylor had a gift for seeing situations clearly without getting caught up in the drama, which was probably why they were such an effective teacher. Students who tried to manipulate or deceive them quickly learned that Taylor could see through bullshit while still maintaining compassion for the human being behind the behavior. That afternoon, I drove to my parents' house in Naperville for a conversation that felt both necessary and terrifying. Mom had called earlier asking if I could come by so we could talk without the chaos and emotion that had characterized Christmas dinner. Dad would be there too, along with Grandma Rose, but they'd specifically asked that Ryan and Jessica not attend this particular discussion. The house looked different in the gray winter daylight, less festive now that the Christmas decorations seemed out of place against the somber mood of our impending conversation. Mom opened the door before I could knock, her eyes red-rimmed from what had clearly been a lot of crying over the past 24 hours. "Come in, sweetheart," she said, pulling me into a hug that lasted longer than usual. "Thank you for coming. I know yesterday was difficult for everyone." Dad was in the living room sitting in his favorite chair with a photo album open on his lap. As I approached, I realized he was looking at pictures from my childhood, images of birthday parties and school events and family vacations that documented my journey from infancy to adulthood. "I've been looking through these all morning," he said without preamble. "Trying to figure out where we went wrong, when we stopped seeing you clearly." Grandma Rose occupied her usual spot on the sofa, her sharp eyes tracking my movements as I settled into the chair across from Dad. She looked less surprised by the situation than my parents, but then again she'd hinted at Christmas dinner that she'd suspected I was up to something significant. "You didn't go wrong," I said, though the words felt inadequate to address the complexity of our family dynamics. "You were good parents. You are good parents. This situation is more about my choices than your failures." "That's generous of you," Mom said, sitting beside Grandma Rose and twisting a tissue between her hands. "But Alex, we took money from our son who was secretly a millionaire. We worried about you paying rent while you were running a company that generates more money in a month than your father makes in a year. We treated you like you needed our guidance and protection when you were actually more successful than any of us." The anguish in her voice revealed how deeply the revelation had shaken her understanding of our family relationships. Mom had built her identity around being a caring mother who looked after her children's well-being, and learning that her care had been unnecessary, even unwanted in some ways, had apparently triggered a crisis of purpose. "Mom, the money you sent me went into an account I rarely checked. I had no idea you were supplementing my income. If I'd known, I would have told you to stop immediately." "But why didn't you tell us about your business?" Dad asked, his voice carrying more confusion than accusation. "We could have been celebrating your achievements instead of worrying about your future. We could have been proud of you publicly instead of making excuses for your career choices to relatives and friends." The question deserved an honest answer, even if that honesty was uncomfortable. Because every time I tried to mention my work, Ryan shut me down. Every time I hinted at what I was building, he dismissed it as unrealistic fantasy. And you both seemed to agree with his assessment, to see me through his lens instead of forming your own opinion. Dad flinched at the accuracy of my observation. "Your brother has always been very confident in his judgments. And you trusted those judgments more than you trusted me," I said, not unkindly but truthfully. "Ryan said I was wasting my potential and you believed him. He said my work wasn't serious and you accepted that assessment without question. After a while it became easier to just stop trying to convince you otherwise." Grandma Rose had been listening to our exchange with the patient attention of someone who'd watched family dramas unfold for 8 decades. Now she spoke up with the directness that had always characterized her communication style. "Michael, Linda, you need to hear what Alex is saying without getting defensive. You did let Ryan's opinions shape how you saw your other children. It's a common mistake parents make with strong-willed firstborns, but it's still a mistake that needs acknowledging." The gentle reprimand from his mother made Dad straighten in his chair, his expression shifting from defensive to receptive. Mom's tears flowed more freely, but she nodded in agreement with Grandma Rose's assessment. "You're right," Mom said. "We've been letting Ryan's version of success define how we measure all our children. Jessica succeeded in ways we could understand and appreciate because her artistic achievements were visible and public. But you succeeded in ways that were quieter and more private, and we mistook that privacy for failure. I also chose to maintain that privacy," I pointed out. I could have been more transparent, more willing to share what I was building even when the reception was skeptical. My secrecy was partially defensive, but it was also about control. I liked being underestimated, because it gave me freedom to work without scrutiny or expectation. The admission surprised my parents, though Grandma Rose nodded as if I'd confirmed something she'd already suspected. The truth was complicated and multilayered, not a simple story of misunderstood genius or neglectful parents, but a complex interaction of personalities, insecurities, and communication failures that had built up over years. "What happens now?" Dad asked. "How do we move forward from this?" It was the practical question that characterized his approach to problems, the desire to identify solutions and implement changes that would prevent similar issues in the future. But some problems didn't have simple solutions, some relationships couldn't be fixed with a plan and a timeline. "I think we start by being more honest with each other," I suggested. "No more pretending, no more performance, no more letting assumptions fill the gaps where communication should be. I'll tell you what's really happening in my life and you'll believe me even when it doesn't match your expectations." "That sounds reasonable," Mom said. "But Alex, honey, what about the money we've been sending you? We need to pay that back." The offer was touching in its sincerity, but also slightly absurd given the financial disparity that now existed between us. "Mom, I make more money in a week than you sent me in 2 years. Keep it, spend it on something you enjoy, donate it to charity. It doesn't matter, it matters to us," Dad insisted. "We need to make this right." Grandma Rose intervened before the conversation could spiral into an argument about money and pride. "What if Alex donated an equivalent amount to a cause his parents care about? That way the money goes to good use without anyone feeling like debts are unresolved." The suggestion was elegant in its simplicity, offering a solution that addressed both my parents' need to make amends and my complete lack of concern about the relatively small sum involved. We quickly agreed that I would donate $5,000 to the local food bank where Mom volunteered, effectively transforming their well-intentioned support into a charitable contribution. With that issue resolved, our conversation shifted to more personal territory. Mom wanted to know about Taylor, the relationship I'd been keeping mostly private because I hadn't wanted to subject someone I cared about to my family's scrutiny and judgment. Dad asked detailed questions about SecureNet solutions, genuinely interested now in understanding what I'd built and how I'd built it. For the first time in years, I felt like my parents were actually seeing me, engaging with who I really was instead of who they'd assumed I must be. The difference was subtle but profound, reflected in the quality of their questions and the attention they paid to my answers. "I wish we'd had this conversation years ago," Mom said as afternoon faded into evening. "I wish we'd asked better questions and listened more carefully to your answers." "We can't change the past," I replied. "But we can do better going forward. That's all any of us can do." The next several weeks brought a cascade of changes that reshaped my life in ways both expected and surprising. I gave notice at Brew and Bites, much to the owner's disappointment but complete lack of surprise. Apparently, several regular customers had figured out that I was doing something more significant than serving coffee, based on the business calls I occasionally took during slow periods and the sophisticated technical discussions I'd had with tech industry patrons. "I always knew you were going places," Maria, the owner, said when I explained that I needed to focus full-time on my software company. "You've got that thing successful people have, that combination of intelligence and determination. I'm just grateful you stuck around as long as you did." Finding a replacement for my apartment was easier than expected. The housing market in Lincoln Park was competitive enough that my modest one-bedroom attracted multiple qualified applicants within days of listing. Packing up my belongings felt like closing a chapter of my life that had been necessary but temporary, a disguise I'd worn for so long that removing it felt both liberating and slightly disorienting. The house hunting process revealed another unexpected aspect of my new situation. Now that I was openly wealthy, suddenly everyone had opinions about where I should live and what kind of property would properly reflect my success. Real estate agents showed me massive suburban mansions with more bedrooms than I could possibly use, downtown penthouses with views that commanded premium prices, and trendy lofts in neighborhoods I'd never even visited. Taylor accompanied me to several showings, providing a grounding perspective amid the overwhelming array of options. "Remember, you're buying a home, not a trophy," they said after one particularly aggressive agent had tried to convince me that I needed a 6,000 square foot estate with a home theater and wine cellar. What do you actually want in a living space? The question helped me focus on practical considerations instead of getting caught up in displays of wealth. I wanted space for a proper home office where I could work comfortably, a location that was convenient for meeting with clients and employees, and a neighborhood that felt welcoming rather than pretentious. After several weeks of searching, I found a renovated brownstone in a quiet Lincoln Park neighborhood that met all my criteria without screaming, "Look how successful I am," to everyone who saw it. Ryan reached out several times during this transition period, initially through tentative text messages and eventually through an invitation to lunch at a restaurant in the Loop. I almost declined, not sure I was ready for an extended conversation with the brother who'd spent years belittling my achievements. But Taylor encouraged me to give him a chance to demonstrate the growth he'd promised in his email. The lunch was awkward at first, both of us navigating unfamiliar territory without the established patterns of our previous relationship to fall back on. Ryan looked different somehow, less polished and confident than usual, his expensive suit unable to hide the uncertainty in his expression. "Thanks for meeting me," he said after we'd ordered. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure I would either," I admitted. But Taylor convinced me that everyone deserves a chance to change. Ryan smiled slightly at the mention of Taylor. "I'd like to meet them properly sometime. Not at a family dinner where everything is complicated and emotionally charged, but just as people getting to know each other." The request surprised me, suggesting a level of investment in rebuilding our relationship that went beyond superficial apologies. "I think that could be arranged." We spent the next 2 hours having the most honest conversation we'd ever had as brothers. Ryan talked about the pressure he'd felt as the oldest child to set the standard for success, the way that pressure had morphed into a need to see himself as superior to his siblings in order to justify the expectations placed on him. He described the panic he'd felt at Christmas when my success had threatened his identity as the accomplished Thompson brother, the way that panic had driven him to lash out instead of celebrating my achievements. "I've been thinking a lot about why I reacted so badly," Ryan said, pushing food around his plate without eating much. "And I realized that I'd built my entire self-image around being the successful one, the brother who made it while you struggled. When that narrative collapsed, I didn't know who I was anymore." The vulnerability in his confession made it impossible to maintain the wall of anger I'd been building against him. "I understand that more than you might think. I spent years building an identity around being underestimated, using that misperception as motivation. When the truth came out, I had to figure out who I was without that chip on my shoulder." "Have you figured it out?" Ryan asked. "I'm working on it," I said honestly. "Turns out, defining yourself is harder when you're not doing it in opposition to someone else's expectations." Our conversation eventually turned to business, and I was surprised to discover that Ryan had genuinely thoughtful questions about SecureNet solutions that weren't motivated by professional jealousy or competitive instinct. He wanted to understand what I'd built and how I'd built it, not to compete with my success but to learn from it. "David has been talking about your company constantly since Christmas," Ryan said. "He's completely fascinated by your business model and the way you've scaled without traditional marketing. Our whole agency has been studying SecureNet solutions as a case study in organic growth." The information was flattering and slightly uncomfortable, the idea of my company being analyzed by marketing professionals who specialized in creating the kind of public presence I'd deliberately avoided. "Have you reached any conclusions?" I asked. "That you're either a genius or incredibly lucky," Ryan replied. "David thinks genius, obviously. He wants to build an entire campaign around your story, the quiet innovator who revolutionized cybersecurity through customer focus instead of self-promotion. That sounds like exactly the kind of attention I've been trying to avoid." Ryan laughed, the first genuine moment of shared amusement we'd had in years. That's what makes it such a compelling story, the successful entrepreneur who doesn't want publicity. It's marketing gold. We discussed the potential partnership between SecureNet Solutions and Martinez Marketing, a conversation that felt surreal in its normalcy. Ryan offered insights about his agency's capabilities without the condescension that had characterized his previous attempts to give me professional advice, and I found myself actually valuing his perspective on marketing strategy. "I know David wants this account badly," Ryan said as we finished lunch, "but I want you to know that whatever you decide, it won't affect my commitment to fixing our relationship. Business is business, but family is family." The clear separation between professional and personal considerations felt like a significant step forward in how Ryan was learning to engage with me. He was beginning to see me as a peer and equal rather than a younger brother who needed guidance and correction. Over the following months, as winter gave way to spring and my new life gradually became normal rather than novel, I discovered that success was more complicated than I'd anticipated. SecureNet Solutions continued to grow, requiring me to hire additional staff, lease proper office space, and navigate the administrative complexities of running a legitimate mid-sized business instead of a one-person operation run from a coffee shop. The partnership with Martinez Marketing moved forward after extensive negotiations that felt strange given Ryan's involvement with the agency. David proved to be as professional and competent as Ryan had suggested, crafting a marketing strategy that respected my desire for relative privacy while still communicating SecureNet Solutions' value to potential clients. Ryan's role in the project was minimal, a deliberate choice on David's part to avoid any appearance of favoritism or conflict of interest. My relationship with my family evolved into something healthier but still imperfect. Mom called less frequently to check on me, having finally accepted that I was capable of managing my own life. Dad engaged with me differently, treating me as a fellow businessman rather than a son who needed career guidance. Jessica and I grew closer, bonded by our shared experience of being somewhat overshadowed by Ryan's dominant personality. Ryan himself became something like a friend, slowly and carefully rebuilding trust through consistent actions rather than grand gestures. We started meeting for lunch every few weeks, conversations that ranged from business strategy to personal struggles to memories of our childhood. The brotherhood we were developing bore little resemblance to the toxic dynamic that had characterized our previous relationship, but it felt more authentic and sustainable. Taylor moved into my new house after we'd been dating for a year, a decision that felt simultaneously momentous and completely natural. They brought books and plants, and a perspective on life that kept me grounded when business success threatened to become my entire identity. Taylor reminded me regularly that my worth as a person wasn't determined by my net worth as a businessman, a lesson I seemed to need repeated frequently. One evening in late spring, I found myself back at my parents' house for another family dinner, this time without the tension and performance that had characterized previous gatherings. We were celebrating Jessica's engagement to a kind-hearted architect she'd met through a work project, and the atmosphere was genuinely joyful rather than competitive. As I watched my family interact, laughing and telling stories without the undercurrent of judgment that had always seemed present before, I reflected on how far we'd all come since that explosive Christmas dinner. The revelation of my success had been painful and messy, forcing all of us to confront uncomfortable truths about our relationships and assumptions. But it had also created space for something better to grow. Ryan caught my eye from across the table and raised his glass slightly in a private toast, a gesture of acknowledgement that spoke volumes about the mutual respect we'd developed. I returned the gesture feeling grateful for the brother I'd found after years of enduring the brother I'd had. Later that night, as Taylor and I drove home through the quiet suburban streets, they asked me the question that had been lurking beneath the surface of my thoughts for months. Do you regret how you handled the reveal? The planning, the surprise, the dramatic confrontation at Christmas dinner. I thought about it carefully before answering, weighing the pain against the progress, the damage against the healing that had followed. I regret that people got hurt, I said finally. I regret that my parents felt deceived, and that Ryan felt humiliated. But I don't regret finally being seen for who I really am. Sometimes growth requires disruption, and sometimes truth has to be uncomfortable before it can be healing. Taylor nodded thoughtfully, their hand finding mine in the darkness of the car. I think you gave your family a gift, even if it didn't feel like one at the time. You showed them that success comes in many forms, and that assumptions can blind us to the people we think we know best. The observation resonated with something Grandma Rose had said to me a few weeks after Christmas, during one of our regular phone conversations. You forced us all to see clearly, she'd told me. That's never comfortable, but it's always necessary. I'm proud of you for having the courage to stop hiding, even when hiding was easier. As Taylor and I pulled into our driveway, I looked at the house I'd bought with money I'd earned through innovation and determination, shared with a partner who loved me for reasons that had nothing to do with my professional success, and I felt something close to peace. The journey from underestimated youngest brother to respected entrepreneur had been longer and more complicated than I'd imagined, but it had also been worth every difficult moment. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom as we walked inside. Thank you for coming tonight, sweetheart. Having all my children together, really together without pretense or performance, that's the best gift a mother could ask for. Love you, I typed back a simple response. Love you too, Mom. The story of how I revealed my success to my family would probably be told and retold at future gatherings, becoming part of our family mythology alongside other dramatic moments and significant transitions. But the real story, the one that mattered most, was quieter and ongoing. It was about learning to value ourselves and each other authentically, about building relationships on truth rather than assumptions, and about having the courage to be fully seen even when being invisible feels safer. My brother had called me broke and worthless at Christmas dinner, and in doing so he'd given me the opening I needed to show my family exactly how wrong their assumptions had been. But more importantly, that moment had forced all of us to examine the foundations of our relationships and rebuild them on something more solid than surface judgments and inherited expectations. Success, I'd learned, wasn't just about building a profitable business or accumulating wealth. It was about being known and valued for who you really are by people who matter, and sometimes achieving that kind of success required the courage to shatter comfortable illusions and demand to be seen clearly, consequences and all. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.